I did it right this time. Oh my goodness, that's awesome. Thank you. Welcome, your backup plan tribe. Do we have a story for you today? Coming all the way from the beautiful England. So let me get started. Welcome, welcome. If you are new here to our channel, thank you for coming. Thank you for our listeners. And thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing down here. I got it right too. I'm doing 2 things right today. Awesome. Going for my third. So if you can like, share, and subscribe down here on the channel, that would be so helpful so that you get notified of any new videos that we get uploaded. Thank you for coming out today. I want to thank all our listeners, and I would like to welcome all of our new listeners to our channel. My name is Tina Ginn, and I am an emergency preparedness coach, a best-selling author of In the Blink of an Eye. I am a financial expert and an app developer of Your Backup Plan app. And I'm located here in beautiful Vancouver, BC. And we post step-by-step tutorials each and every week on our channel, sometimes news, tips, and tricks to what's going on in the world today. And whatever else I feel like posting. So check out our Instagram, our Twitter, and our YouTube channels for any new releases of our broadcasts, our live streams, as well as our podcasts. So thank you for coming out to our live stream today. Let me think. I want to let you know what we do on this channel. We talk and interview real life people each and every week with their real life stories. Very, very invigorating, inspiring, and motivating for everybody. It's coming up to our year anniversary already. So I wanted to briefly describe Your Backup Plan app. And this is a little synopsis of what we do on our channel and what we're all about. We talk about it won't happen to me, why people don't prepare for the unexpected, not looking at the risk and being prepared for an emergency that wasn't an option for me. What if? It is ground in stone that something will happen. It's just when. So I truly believe that we are not Superman, but people in our complicated lives with no time to get prepared for anything. Were we prepared for the pandemic in 2020? No. Were we prepared for wildfires or floods or hurricanes? No. Were we prepared for earthquakes? No. Are we prepared for the inevitable? No. But families, partners, businesses, single people can move on with their busy lives knowing that their stuff, that their important information that's all up in their own head can be organized in one easy place so that the impact on their own life and their important loved ones can be managed easily with peace of mind for any storm or tragedy that strikes. I coach each and every one because there's no one that gets out of this alive. No one is Superman, and why not look at what we can do today to be protected? The stresses involved with life tragedies can be overwhelming for us. Knowing you have a plan can bring so much needed peace of mind. We just don't know what that might be. So be prepared for the unexpected and get started on your own backup plan, and try out the Backup Plan app and get better educated with the emerging blueprint that's going to be launched very, very soon. And you know, Brené Brown says everyone has a story. It will bring you to your knees. And I think this is where our guest today, Phil Mews, from the beautiful UK, has a story to tell because it's his survival guide that has brought him here today. It's his story. So what will your story be, listeners? And I want to welcome, I have had 1 year anniversary coming up very soon, and I want to welcome my German friends. Meine deutsche Freunde sind in unserem Podcast willkommen. Wenn Sie Kommentare haben, können Sie gern Fragen stellen. I just wanted to introduce my German friends because you guys are kicking ass when it comes to listening to my podcast. So thank you from my heart to yours. Thank you. Viele, viele Grüße für alle. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to bring on Phil Mews here today, our special guest.
Hello.
Hi, Phil. Hi. I just wanted to introduce you. It's not too bad of a long introduction, so hold on 1 second.
No problem.
So we have Phil Mews today to be introduced from beautiful UK. He's written a book called Orphan Boys. It takes a village to raise a child. It's a beautiful, charming, heartfelt, heartbreaking memoir, and very wonderful and powerful. He tells a story of how his idyllic English childhood is blown apart as his parents die within 10 weeks of each other, and how his community rallied around to save him and his younger brother. Phil Mews is a BAFTA-nominated TV producer who is now working as a writer and is based at his home in Northern England. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you so much, Tina. It's lovely to be here.
I meet so many cool people that all around the world that I get so excited because they'll be friends for life. I'm so excited to have you come on our channel today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to hear you speaking German there, because Germany, Berlin is one of my favorite holiday destinations, and I actually went there for my honeymoon.
Nice. He talks about how his life in... Here he comes.
Sorry.
There he is. That's technology for you.
It is.
You never know what you're going to get.
Absolutely.
So, Phil, tell us all about your story. It's amazing. I haven't bought your book yet, but I am going to buy it. And I really think that it tells a story that could possibly be a movie one day. I'm sure you've thought about that because of the world that you've worked in most of your life.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to hear more about from beginning to end of where it's taken you.
Okay. So let me take you back to 1976. In the UK, we experienced the hottest summer on record, I think it was, or certainly the hottest summer for many years. And at that point, I was 6 years old, and my younger brother Roger was 4, and my elder brother Richard would have been about 16. And we lived on our beautiful farm in County Durham in northeast England with our parents, Harry and Alma. And it was idyllic. We had an idyllic life. We had woodlands, we had Tarzan swings, we had a lot of freedom as children. So we could go off for hours on end as a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old and play and make mud pies and get in the river and make Tarzan swings and whatever, and play with our friends, and then come back when we were hungry. We came home when we were hungry. And we had this lovely life. It was wonderful. There was horses, lots of sheep, cows, plenty of livestock, chickens, the whole lot. 18 months later, so we're looking at November 1977, I'd gone to bed and kissed my dad goodnight and gone up to bed. And during the night, I shared a room with my little brother in the farmhouse. And during the night, I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning and I heard movement around in the house, which was unusual. So I got up and walked along the passageway to my mother's and father's bedroom. And my mother was sat on the bed crying, and I asked her what was wrong. And she just sat me down and said, "Darling, your daddy's died tonight." And my world changed at that point. So we were then plunged into this world of darkness, is the only way I could describe it. So I regret that I persuaded my mother to let me see my dad laid out in his coffin in the house a couple of days later, which affected me for the best part of 40 years and caused me to have nightmares, and probably really suffered PTSD as a result of it. I know I did. But life was very, very difficult because...
And they don't do that much anymore as much, do they? As
No.
they did in the 70s.
No, this was a real tradition, and it was because we grew up in this 12th century farmhouse that was very large. And so there was a big room at the end of the passageway on the ground floor that was the dining room, and it had steps leading up to it. And it was only used for things like Christmas Day and other formal occasions. And my father's body was laid out in a coffin in the dining room, and people would come to see him. And that really traumatized me. I dreamt in the immediate evenings after that, at night, I dreamt that my dad was the scary ghost like on Scooby-Doo, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I dreamt he was coming to get me, and that was really traumatizing. So
was it open? Was it an open casket as well?
Yeah.
Oh, that's scary. Yeah.
And but in my mother's defense, she was really reluctant to let me see him. Really reluctant. Now, I know if grow up in Ireland, it's the norm. You're almost lifted up to kiss the dead person, as a child. But no, my mother was very reluctant to let me see him, but I did anyhow. And it was awful. And I thankfully didn't go to my father's funeral. My mother felt that we were far too young, my younger brother and I. So Dad hadn't left a will. There was no will. So immediately his estate went into a status called probate, which meant that bank accounts were frozen. My mother couldn't buy things we needed for the farm. We had a sheep farm and cattle farm, and they needed to buy extra feed for the farm. They needed to buy feed for the horses and dogs. My dad died 5 weeks before Christmas, and I remember my grandmother telling me that my mother had gone to her and said, in tears with embarrassment, that please, Mother, can I borrow some money because I need to get the children something for Christmas, because they won't understand if Father Christmas doesn't come.
Right.
So... And this was all because the estate was in probate and the accounts were still frozen. And this went on until I think about the middle of February. So Dad died in the middle of November. This went on until about the middle of February. And then some of the money was released, and my mother was able to pay back my grandparents. And then the following week, on the Monday, my mother took me to school. I was 7 still at this point, and she took me to school and she kissed me goodbye, and I never saw her again.
Oh dear.
We went to a friend's house, and where in the afternoon, where she took ill and collapsed, and she was taken by ambulance to a local hospital, and that night she died of a heart attack, and she was only 43 years old. So she left behind a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, an 18-year-old, and 2 grieving parents who were hitting on 70, and a sheep farm and cattle farm.
That was still up in a mess from before.
Yeah.
It was still a mess.
Yeah. I mean, my elder brother Richard, who was 18, had done an amazing job of just keeping things ticking over and going out there and working while grieving as well. And it was just taken for granted that's what he had to do. But it must have been incredibly difficult for him. And I'm probably only realizing that now as an adult,
right,
how difficult it was for him. I mean, he was an incredible person, Richard. He still is. It's the strength that he must have had to hone in to just get on and get through and get to that next stage.
He had to step up and be a man, right?
Yeah, oh yeah. And he did. He did. He really did. And so with my grieving grandparents, we heard someone that morning, Richard sat us down and told us our mother had died the night before. And I remember going through into the sitting room with my little brother and just shutting the door behind us, shutting everyone out. And there was just the two of us. And I kept thinking I was going to wake up, that it was a bad dream. I still remember it like it was yesterday. And then at one point, I think somebody came in, and I remember somebody said, a friend of the family said, the poor little orphans. And that was the first time I heard that word used in reference to us. And I always felt uncomfortable. And so they're calling the book Orphan Boys is slightly
against what you were.
Yeah, because we never felt like we were orphans, because to me, orphans were Oliver Twist, Annie. They had nobody, they had nothing, they didn't have love. Whereas, yes, we'd lost our parents, but we were surrounded by love. We had amazing grandparents. My two aunts, so my auntie Brenda, my mum's sister, was just astounding. She was straight there, and she was my grandmother's right-hand person, really, to help bring us up. We had my dad's sister, my Auntie Olive, who was just wonderful. She came and took us for days out and showered us with love and helped Grandma where she could. But essentially it was Grandma and Auntie Brenda that brought us up with Grandad. And we had to try and just get on with life and deal with life. And then I think it was a week after my mother's funeral, I'd gone back to school. I think it was. And there was a knock at the door, and it was the authorities, social services, they're called over here. And they basically said they wanted to take Roger and I into care, and that would be a plan. My grandmother physically chased them out the house. Nobody was going to take her children away from her grandchildren away from her. She physically chased them out the house. She wasn't having any of it. And thankfully, there was a safety net where a really good friend of the family, who was in a Masonic lodge with my father, had spoken to some people he was connected to, and they'd said, we can help here. We can pay for the boys to go to boarding school when they reach 8 years old, each of them, and they can go to boarding school not too far away, and they can come home every few weeks and spend time with Grandma on the farm and see the family, and that will help our grandparents to keep the family unit together.
Awesome.
So that's
Thank
what happened.
goodness for that plan.
Yeah, really lucky. So I went to school in a lovely town called Barnard Castle, which is about 18 miles from where our farm was. And 6 months later, I went away to school on my own. I had to leave my little brother behind. And I remember the first week, I cried a lot. And they would, the boys in the dormitory who were older and been there for a couple of years, they would take you to the house mother, who wasn't very forgiving.
No.
And she
the name alone doesn't sound forgiving.
Yeah, she was a real Miss Hannigan. She really was. And she wasn't very kind. And she just used to say, oh, don't be silly, Mews, you'll soon get over this homesickness. And what I didn't tell them was I wasn't homesick. I was grieving. I was still grieving. My parents hadn't been dead a year. My dad hadn't even been dead a year. And here I was away from my family on my own. I was 8 years old.
Did they both die of a heart attack then?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Do you
dad was
think,
2.
I think a partner can die um, from the grief, from the loss. You could.
Yeah, I mean, my mother. This story's told in the book. So the previous summer, before my father died, and we'd been on holiday in the south of England to my uncle's farm in Hampshire, which is near the south coast of England, and my mother had taken ill there and been taken to hospital where she had suffered a heart attack. So she already had a history of a
Mm,
bad heart, and so did my dad. Um, but I think that there's a good chance, we'll never know these things, do we? But I think there's probably a good chance that her passing was speeded up by the heartbreaking loss of my father, but also the stress that she was under,
yeah.
all the financial, trying to keep everything afloat whilst nursing the broken heart, having lost the love of her life, dealing with 2 little children who were crying for their daddy, an 18-year-old who probably was crying in private,
Yeah.
and dealing with her own grief. So that, I think, it all compounded together to
Absolutely.
to um,
Create
to
this too much stress kind of
yeah,
problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, and then again, when she died, there was no will either. She hadn't had time to organise it, and there was probate again, and
Oh dear.
all that.
You
So,
didn't learn the first time around.
no, we just didn't have time. I think we just got, because there was only a week between the estate being legally passed into the name of my mother,
Yeah.
and then she died. There was a week. It's so yeah. Nobody expected it. It was
No.
the biggest shock. It was not just a shock to our family, not just a shock to our friends, but to the wider community in Weardale where we live. It was a huge shock, and the village was left reeling, because we are a close knit community here. People really do look out for each other. Connections stretch back generations between families, and new connections between families are being made all the time.
Yeah.
So it was tough. It was tough. And then so my grandmother and grandfather were heartbroken. They were running the farm, and I went away to boarding school, and I think I was there for 2 years. And my younger brother Roger was then due to join me. And that summer we lost my grandfather. He had the most awful time in the Second World War, fighting in Burma against the Japanese, and had seen some horrific things. And I think certainly he'd suffered PTSD. Definitely had. They always called it shell shock back then.
Right.
And he never got over losing my mother. And I think I don't like using the word suicide, but he left on his own terms.
Well, you give up, inside
Yeah,
of you when it's time to give up, it's
yeah.
time.
And
Yeah.
he took his own way out. And I don't think my grandmother ever forgave him for what he did, but he clearly reached the point he couldn't take anymore. And I didn't know this as a child. This is what had happened. This is something I found out when I was in my early 20s. And my heart broke for him when I did find out. And so we just had to get on. But I think there was always this thing hanging over us that, because by this time, my grandmother was now in her early 70s. She'd had a stroke the year before my mother died, and she always used to say, if we made plans for anything, can we go on holiday to the seaside this summer? And she'd always say, if God spares me. So it was always drummed into us that we wouldn't have her around forever. And that although we felt loved and secure in many respects, there was always that element of insecurity that we didn't know. God, what if she dies? We'd known I'd lost my father, my mother, my grandfather, And then I think my grandmother's sister died the following year. And I started to think, crikey, is somebody going to die every year? And I started to become suspicious. Not suspicious, superstitious. So I developed a really bad OCD, where I used to have to do this thing where I'd have to go into a room and touch a wall so many times on each wall. And if I didn't, then that meant someone was going to die and I was going to cause their death by not touching the wall. I know it sounds crazy, it sounds ridiculous,
but you put it in your own head that way, right?
Yeah, because I kept thinking I could have done something to have stopped my granddad leaving that night that he did and went back to their own house and to doing what he did. And I could have maybe stopped. I could maybe hold off the death of my grandmother, because we kept thinking she could go any year now. You know, in the 1970s, 1980s, 72 was considered elderly. It was still considered very old. So there was always this thing in the back of your mind that we're going to lose her, we're going to lose her. And even if she was sleeping in the chair, I would start to panic and I'd have to go over and check she wasn't dead, which I know is ridiculous, but that was our life, you know. And don't get me wrong, we had a very happy life with my grandmother. She was amazing, and my aunt was amazing, and my brother was amazing. And we were fairly happy kids. Boarding school was tough. And, you know, I go into that in quite a lot of detail in the book about what happened to us at boarding school. I was okay at boarding school, but my younger brother, Roger, had a tough time. He had a really tough time in the junior school, when the house mother, this Miss Hannigan character, she sort of victimised him. And anyhow, so it does sound like there's a lot of doom and gloom, but the thing with Orphan Boys
is... It kind of sounds like Harry Potter's story.
Yeah, do you know, if I'd had a magic wand...
Look what you could have done.
I could have thrown a spell on it. But we were always aware of how lucky we were, and we did feel lucky. Now, I know people watching this and listening to this will be thinking, how could you feel lucky? You've lost both your parents, your grandfather, you're away from your family. But as far as we were concerned, we grew up on a beautiful farm. We still lived on that farm. We had an amazing school to go to. Now, yeah, it wasn't always perfect, but that's school for you. We had amazing opportunities at school. We met people I was living amongst all these boys at school who, many of them lived abroad. So there was people from boys from Nigeria and Cyprus and Germany and Saudi Arabia. And the world was suddenly there in front of you, and you were tantalized with stories in these different countries. So that probably sort of instilled a bit of a traveling bug in me from when I was older.
It probably helped you, though, listening to different stories, especially as a child, to understand people's different lives.
Yeah, I think so. And I think we were always grateful. And my grandmother used to have this thing where she'd say, right, you're coming home next weekend to see me, you and your brother. The following 2 weeks after that, you're coming home again. Would you like to bring home with you a friend each who can't go home to their parents this holiday? So we would be bringing our friends from Nigeria and from Hong Kong and Singapore and the Philippines. We had friends from all over. And I mean, at that time in the 1970s, in our little village in the north of England, I think sometimes they maybe had people hadn't seen anyone who was of African origin before, hadn't seen a black person before. So my grandmother loved it. She loved making a fuss of these boys and having them come to stay with us and giving them a weekend of love. I think that was it. She just wanted to give them some love and look after them and make them feel that they weren't so isolated away from their families. And she was incredible. My grandmother was incredible. And someone since described this book as my love letter to her. And you know what? I think that they're right. I think this is my love letter to my grandmother, because she was just the most incredible woman. She was amazing, and she saw us become adults. She lived until I was 27 when my grandmother died, and Roger, my younger brother, would have been 24. And she saw her boys grow up. She'd done her job.
Yeah.
She saw me graduate from university, and she always said, she was so proud of us all. But she'd done her job, and she did a good job, and we were with her when she died, and
That's awesome.
at the moment when she died, and I don't think people always like to use this phrase, but I do. She had what we would call a good death. She died peacefully in a hospital bed with all her family around her. We were holding her hands, and she'd not been able to speak for about a week and a half. But she just opened her eyes at that last moment, and she looked up and she said, "Oh, my Alma," which was my mother's name, her daughter. And she says, "My Alma." And she smiled and she went. And
You know what that was, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
She came for her.
Yeah. She came
But
for
how
her.
sweet is that?
And that gave me so much comfort, although we were very saddened to lose her. That gave me so much comfort. It really did, because she was an incredible woman, and she had so much love for us boys, and she'd always said that had she not been given the task that fate had handed her of looking after her two boys and bringing us up, she wouldn't have lived to the age she did. She was 87 when she died. I mean, this is a woman who, when she was 68, had a major stroke and was bedridden for some time.
Oh, wow.
To go on and lose her daughter, and she never got over that. But to be able to work through that and find the strength each day to look after my brother and I, with the help of my Auntie Brenda and the rest of the family.
It sounds like you had the whole community, though. You really had it was a community.
We did. Yeah, I mean, the community was amazing. We had the little school where I was at when my parents died. At that time, it was run by some lovely Catholic nuns, and they would help. And, it was my birthday party about a couple of months after my mother's death. And the nuns would say to my grandmother, "Let's have the party for Philip at the school. Then you're not having all these children running around the house, and so we can just help you and alleviate some of the pressure that you must be under." And then I would get taken all the time to my Auntie Brenda's, she lived on the coast in Sunderland. And so I would get to spend all my holidays on the beach and with her and my cousin. And that, again, it's just all that support. So it is true when they say, it takes a village to raise a child. I really believe that. But the village isn't always just a physical village. It's the extended family. It's just all those people who have that connection to those who are lost, who've going through that loss, I should say.
Right. What do you think, Phil? What do you think could have been different? Would it have changed anything? Would it been easier as a child? What could have been different in that situation? It's not a test.
No. There's definitely two things spring to mind. So for my grandparents and my mother, the process of the legalities of dealing with death and the finances and all that, the way that is dealt with in a very time-consuming manner, did not help. So that would have definitely made an initial immediate difference. I think for my brother Roger and I, it would have been for us not to have been bullied by the person that was charged with our care at school. That's the only way I can put it. She's dead now. I did change her name for the book, and the reason I did that is because her children are adults and still live in the area and still alive, and it wasn't fair on them. But I couldn't lie about how badly at times we were treated and bullied, and it's those scars. Not so much with me, but certainly with Roger. They lasted for a lot of years. It lasted for decades, really. So I think that we never told our family what was going on at school because we knew they had enough to contend with already.
Right.
We knew, as they had protected us as children from certain elements and knew the real whys and wherefores of my grandfather's death, for example, we in turn had to protect our grandmother and our elder brother and not tell them everything that was going on because we knew that they had enough on their plate. And there's only so much sometimes a person can take. So we just had to sort of get on with it and develop our own coping mechanisms. So they're probably the two things that I would have changed. I think had I have been able to write a letter to my younger self and say, look, all these things that you're worrying about, it's all going to be okay. Don't spend time stressing and worrying about them and try and be more confident. Because I wish I had been more confident as a child because I really didn't have any confidence at all. And I wasn't brilliant at sport and in the school, which was a good school, a brilliant school, but sport mattered over everything. Sport mattered over academic achievement.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, it was like that. Sport was everything. You know, you could be rubbish at your exams, but if you were good at rugby, you were hailed as a hero. And I think so I was more, Roger was more sporty, I was more artistic, but the artistic side for anyone, you got no credit for that as well. No credit always for that. So I wish I'd maybe been more, that could have led to us both being more confident as younger people. But
do you think that not being prepared from your parents, was that a generational thing of people just aren't prepared, or do you think it was just because they felt nothing was going to happen? That, you know, the real reason today, I mean, brings you back to the 70s, but the same goes for people in 2020.
Oh yeah, totally. I think, to be honest, Tina, that I think it's just they thought that they were younger. They were younger, and I just don't think they realised what
the effects are.
Yeah. There had been, there'd been a history of wills in the family, and so I've still got copies of some of them, and they're these beautiful old parchments with copper plate writing on them, all handwritten, and they're beautiful documents. If you could describe a will as such a thing, but they are beautiful documents. I think it was just their age, and I think that's what it was, and so. Yeah, so
that's a scary thought, to think that nothing has really changed.
No,
today,
no. And it wasn't. And the tragedy was that wasn't. So we grew up to be adults, but then our story took another twist. So I decided to write Orphan Boys as a writing exercise. Really, for me, I was recommended. I worked with a brilliant broadcaster called Sandi Toksvig, who has written many, many wonderful books. And I was telling her I was trying to write a novel and it wasn't coming together. And she said, well, look, why don't you write your story? She knew my story. We were friends. And so I started writing Orphan Boys. I started sketching out the book, and I phoned both my brothers and I said, look, I'd really like to tell our story. would you be okay with that? And they both were like, yeah, you do it. No problem at all. So I wrote the book, and as we were sort of trying to organise get a publishing deal and get a launch date and everything, we got the phone call, the worst phone call possible, to say that Roger had died. He'd been found. He died from an aneurysm. He lived in Spain, in Mallorca in Spain. He'd gone on to be incredibly successful. He had his own radio show on Radio 1 in Mallorca. He was a very well-respected DJ in Mallorca. He had the most wonderful life out there, the most wonderful friends. And at the age of 44, he'd gone. We'd left him. And he was my best friend. And Richard and I and the rest of the family were just heartbroken. We were devastated. And again, there was no...
Don't tell me.
Yeah. So,
what are we going to do with your family?
well, Roger, thankfully for Roger, he was very cautious, and he'd saved, and he had all his paperwork, all his other paperwork was in place, but he didn't own his apartment. So that actually made things a hell of a lot easier. And we had the most amazing community out in Magaluf in Mallorca, where he lived, who just rallied round us.
Oh, nice.
They organised funeral directors. I had to organise his funeral with his friends on Skype, because I was still in the UK. And there was no point us flying out until we could set a date. So we had to organise it all with translators. It was a very surreal experience. And it was probably, I'll be honest, it was far more devastating than losing my parents.
Yeah, it's harder as we get older.
Yeah. And I think just, he was just the light that lit up a room. Roger was just the light that lit up a room. So when I was originally wrote the book, sorry, I'm just...
It's okay. Take a deep breath.
Fine.
You'll get me. I'm the queen of emotion here. So
yeah, I'm normally really composed, but yeah, it's tough. So when I came to write the book, I called it Orphan Boy. When we lost Roger, I changed the title to Orphan Boy.
Oh, awesome.
Because I had then the responsibility of at least trying to tell some of his side of the story as well.
Good for you.
And so it's not just a love letter to my grandmother, really. It's a bit of a love letter to Roger. And I've dedicated the book to him and my grandparents and parents, because he just was the most incredible person. And I've learned so much from him. And we knew anyway that life was precious and you have to live a very good life and a full life. But this has taught us that you just have got to do it. You can't put things off. Roger had told me 17 years before he died that he wanted to go and live in Mallorca. And he was nervous about doing it. He was nervous about whether he would make a success of it. And I said to him, "You'll smash it." And he said, "Will you come over with me?" So I went over with him. I went for a week's holiday and I flew back on my own and left him out there. And he'd hoped by the end of that first week, he would have an apartment and the possibility of a job. I think he started working on the third night of the holiday. He got himself a job. So I spent the rest of the holiday with strangers. But no, he was just an incredible guy. And I'm just always so proud of him. And I feel bad that I'm more proud of him now that he's gone. And I've heard more and more stories about things that he did, good things that he did for people, that I couldn't be more proud of him, but I am. My pride for him just increases every day. And it's, so yeah, we miss him terribly. And it's been a wake-up call for us all, really, to make sure we keep enjoying life and to follow our dreams. And so with that, I was living in Scotland with my husband for 15 years, and I'd always dreamed maybe of moving to the countryside. And then my husband suggested one day, why don't we move back to the village where you grew up? Then
Ah,
we won't be starting again. So 2.5 years ago, we decided to change jobs and sell our house. And within 10 weeks, we'd moved, and here we are. So I'm now
well,
living about 3/4 of a mile from the farm where we grew up and where Orphan Boys is set.
started.
Yeah. So
That's
this
so cool.
full circle, really, and
Yeah.
it's lovely, and we've been welcomed home with open arms by the community. It's been wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And I'm glad I was here for this last year, because this last year has been difficult for everybody around the world.
Hmm.
I'm glad that I'm relieved that I've been in this wonderful, warm community, because I could understand how some people in big cities and towns could be so isolated in those densely populated areas, yet very isolated. Yet here, in the beautiful countryside of our village and
It's
Weirdo.
not so noticeable, I guess.
Yeah, I think obviously there's isolated people everywhere, but certainly for me, this has been a lifeline to at least every day I can walk out in beautiful, and at the moment I'm outside my front door, I'm in beautiful countryside, which is lovely, and I feel very lucky, very fortunate. So for that respect, it's amongst others, it's been a really good move, and it's been then well placed to then start building a new chapter of our future together as a
It's
family.
probably what your soul needed, what your deep
Yeah,
inside soul wanted.
I think so. I think when I go for walks in the local area, I almost feel like this is going to sound so strange.
You're
I feel
home.
like, I feel like the landscape is hugging me.
Hmm.
That's going to sound so strange to some people, but I do. I feel like enveloped in this gigantic hug of rolling hills and the river, and just the wildlife and the farm livestock around, and just everything. It's just, I think there's probably triggers of memories everywhere for me, but I just feel like there's just so much love, and not wanting to
Beauty.
sound too hippie about it.
Yeah. Well, Phil, it's probably your soul is saying, "What took you so long, Phil? What took you so long?"
Yeah, I think I had to, I had to go out there, and I wasn't. It's fairly remote where we live, so I couldn't have worked. I couldn't have had my 21 year
Job.
in TV, making all those wonderful programs, and working with amazing people, and getting to travel and
True.
do all those things. So I've no regrets. I think everything's happened for a reason, and I've loved the time that I lived in Scotland. And my husband's Scottish. I've got the most amazing Scottish family as well, who are just amazing and lovely.
That's awesome.
And it's good that we're not too far away from them either. We're just a few
Hmm.
hours drive away. So yeah, no regrets at all. None at
No.
all. I think I wrote to Roger in the end, and if you'll allow me to just,
Sure.
in the acknowledgements, I said to Roger, I said, Roger, you took more steps alongside me on this journey than anyone else, and you were the only person who truly experienced much of what had happened in this book. We turned out all right in the end, didn't we? I love you and miss you always, my bonny lad. That's a real Northeast phrase, my bonny lad.
Uh-uh.
It's just such a term of endearment. And I think we did. I think we did underplayed it. We did turn out all right, and I know that my grandmother would be proud of us. Our grandmother would be proud of us.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I'm sure that he's with her up there, and it does give me some comfort. Not always, but it does. It just gives me some comfort. So yeah.
Yeah. What would you like to tell people, our listeners, that you've learned from all of this? There must be quite a few different things that you could touch on.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'll always say, I had to sadly go to a funeral this weekend of a dear lad who lived in our village who passed away at a ridiculously young age, and it was just heartbreaking to see. And I said to some of his friends that night, I said, there will come a time when you remember him with smiles rather than with tears. And I say that to anybody that loses somebody. I hope for you, and I'm sure there will come the time when you start remembering with smiles and laughter rather than the tears. But in order to remember with the smiles and laughter, you've got to make those memories, which means you've got to treasure life, you've got to treasure your relationships and treasure the people that you love. And as long as you are doing that and are living a good life and doing your best to live a good life, I know life's not always easy, but if you do your best with what life gives you and just exude love, then you will create those precious memories that will one day comfort you in your hour of need. And I really feel strongly about that. And when I think back to my grandmother, I always told her I loved her. Whenever I spoke to my brother, as guys in our 40s, and I would speak to him on the phone in Spain, I'd always say afterwards, love you, bruv. And he would always say the same to me. And I always say the same to my older brother. I say the same to my husband. I say the same to my niece and nephews. Don't be ashamed to say you love someone. But if you make those memories, then when the time comes, one day, you will remember people with smiles eventually rather than tears. The other thing I would say is write a will. Just write a will.
Get your crap together.
Get your crap together. Get things in place. There's nothing morbid about saying, right, should anything happen, there's a green folder.
This is what I want.
In that cupboard, here's a list. This is what I want. And yes, I do want Kylie Minogue played at my funeral. Or whatever,
Yes.
Because that, as much as that sounds morbid, my God, it will help the people who you are leaving behind. It will help those that you're leaving behind. And we were lucky with Roger because we talked a lot. We talked a lot, and we talked about what we would want. And we also talked about what we wouldn't want. I think that was it. Roger always was very clear with me about what he didn't want. So, we asked people to wear bright clothes at his wedding, at his funeral, because he didn't want people all in black. That wasn't how he lived his life. So he wanted his party, his goodbye party, to be representative of how he lived his life, which was
he wanted his personality to shine.
Yeah, which was one full of love and color and music.
Beautiful.
So I think that will help you. That will help you. And certainly things are changing here in the UK. I don't know how it is in Canada, but the way funerals are being done in the UK now, people are starting to say, this is what I want. I don't want to have X, Y, and Z just because that's the done thing. This is what I want. And even most recently, the Duke of Edinburgh had his own coffin drawn on a a customized Land Rover. I mean, how wonderful is that? That he got the funeral that he wanted.
Right.
And I think that if people know the deceased is getting the funeral that they would have wanted, it will help them. It will help you to the next stage. And no matter how tragic the circumstances are, as they often can be, as we've discovered in our village most recently, it will help. You know, it will give. Might just feel like a tiny bit of comfort at the time, but I think in coming years it does give you more and more comfort. And I think that's really important. I think it's really.
Can you imagine if he hadn't been prepared? I mean, he was 99. I mean, people think that that's a good time to be prepared, but as we've said with Phil here, I don't understand, because sickness and death and tragedies don't just happen because you're white or you're black or you're brown or you're pink or purple. It doesn't happen because you're a certain age, as you've experienced. It happens anytime. And for some reason we think, well, when you're 99, I'll be prepared then. That's just what people think. And could you imagine if he hadn't have been prepared for his passing, what that would have looked like for the palace, for the queen?
I think the thing is, the way that the palace works and the way that the Queen, the royal family works, is these things are always prepared. So I don't think that would have ever been a scenario. But
Exactly.
I think the classic example is when Princess Diana passed away on the 30th of August 1997, they were like, what do we do? We've got no precedent here. You've got two sides of a family who probably, I think, by all accounts, at times were working against each other, but at times then had to work together to decide what was going to be the right thing to do to honour someone, because, this was a public figure.
Right.
And she's such a public presence. So I think that Princess Diana's death was a classic example of an institution like the British monarchy being thrown into absolute turmoil in a very public way, because nobody envisaged that this icon, which is what she was going to be killed so tragically at the age of 36.
Yeah. And it had a huge effect on the boys too, just like it did with you.
Huge effect on the boys. And I know, because when I saw those boys walking behind the coffin on the day of the funeral, and I remember that day very clearly, a little part of me was like, oh, why are you making those poor boys do that? Whose decision has this been?
But the difference people don't realize between what they have in a monarchy to what the average person has around the world is that they have a team of different departments that look after you, look after what you're going to wear, look after what you're going to eat, look after what your bed looks like. They look after your finances, they look after all of that. And in our world, no one does that. And that's why I created your backup plan app, because I wanted people to have a team of people within their pocket that they could rely on and entrust their stuff with.
Yeah.
So that to me was the importance.
We have a little bit of a tradition here in Stanhope that it seems that when people die, no matter who it is, there's always somebody turns up at the house with food. It might be a homemade pie or a quiche or something. Somebody will turn up with food. I know when recently a dear friend of mine lost her husband very suddenly, and the next morning, all I could think of was, right, she's got her son and his wife and the grandchildren that have turned up at the house during the night. They're going to need to eat.
Right.
If I took a bag of breakfast stuff, I took bacon and bread rolls and orange juice, because I thought that's just one less thing for them to have to think about. And that's food, and the same, then somebody else took soup up or whatever and pies and whatever. So at least they're not having to think about the food aspect. Can you imagine if you had somebody bring you a package of all the paperwork that you needed and all the instructions that you needed at that crucial moment when you are going through,
when it doesn't think right, your head doesn't think right, Phil?
No.
At that moment, you can't think straight.
But it's as vital as food, because then if you're not, the less time you have to worry about paperwork and about organizing and about decisions on funeral music or flowers or whatever.
Yeah.
That gives you more time to tend to your heart and to deal with the grieving process. The more time we spend, in my view, dealing with all this other stuff, it's putting off the healing. It's going to take longer to heal. I really believe that. I really do believe that. So if you can make that process as smooth as you can, it will help. It might feel like in a really small way at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's actually a major, major deal. And it really does help you heal a lot more quickly.
I totally believe that. And I call that process to be present. That's what I call it. Because if someone's sick and you're trying to get them help and recovery, you need to be present to get them to be better.
Yeah.
So it's so important. People don't realize it until you're stuck having to deal with it like you have, Phil. It's an amazing, amazing story and beautiful words that you've said today.
Yes.
So thank you so very much for that. Did you have anything else that you'd like to tell the listeners? Where can they find your book?
So my book is available on Amazon. I don't know, do you have Barnes & Noble in Canada?
Yes.
Barnes & Noble stock my book. If you're in Australia, it's in Booktopia. It's all around the world on Amazon. In the UK, it's available at Waterstones, WH Smiths and Foyles, along with the amazing array of independent bookshops, which we've got to go and support them. And also, do you know what? If you don't have the money to buy a copy, libraries. Let's look after our libraries. And I was so pleased my book was stocked in a library in remote New Zealand, and somebody got in touch after getting it from their library on the South Island of New Zealand. So, but it's available pretty much everywhere. So, and I've had some lovely feedback from the readers in Canada already. So, it's a great story, and it's a positive story. It might be a lot of heartbreak in it, but there's a lot of love, there's a lot of hope, and there's a lot of healing in it. So
awesome.
Thank you.
Oh, that's so beautiful, Phil. Thank you. And I think I can expect kind of a little competition. So if any of our listeners find the Orphan Boys book in a library, I'd like you to take a picture of it and post it on social media.
Yeah, definitely. And
tag you.
Tag me in. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Twitter at Phil Mews. I'm on Instagram at Phil Mews Author, and I've got a Phil Mews Author page on Facebook as well. But I haven't done TikTok yet. I'm not that advanced.
That's okay. We'll have to, me too. I've got to build myself to that point.
Absolutely.
No, that's beautiful. Thank you so very much for taking the time out of
Oh,
your night that's getting later and later for you. I
yeah, I think we're on. It may be midnight. Is it midnight? Oh, it's just gone midnight here, but that's fine. Been a pleasure to talk to you, and sending so much love to you all in Canada
Oh, thank you. And around the world.
and around.
Yes, our majority of listeners are in the States. Our second is Canada, and our third is Germany, and our fourth is Ireland.
Oh, well, love to everyone in the US, Canada, Ireland, and of course, Germany and everywhere else.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Phil, for your beautiful story. Beautiful story. I'd love to find out what you're going to do next, because I know you've got some other plans in the works. I know you do.
Yeah, I've got so I'm doing a few talks on loss and bereavement, but I am also just starting to put the finishing touches to my first novel, which it may not be published for a year or two. We're just trying to organise that at the moment, but that's called The Girl on the Red Carpet, and that'll be coming out possibly next year. We'll have to wait and see. But it's a great story, and it's set in the world of breakfast TV, something different.
Oh, wow. That sounds interesting.
Something completely different. There's a lot of comedy in it, some great characters, some larger-than-life characters. But no, I'm really excited about it, and we'll see what other projects arise in the next year or two.
That's exciting. Oh, thank you, Phil. Thank you. Thank you so very much for coming on our show today, Phil.
Oh, thank you, Tina. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
Well, guys, I can't believe another exceptional story from a real story of a real person. It's unbelievable. That's all I can say. You know, to listen at the courage and the bravery that you've had, Phil. It's beautiful, beautiful, so beautiful. So thank you, listeners, for coming out today to listen to our story of an exceptional orphan boy story of life after something's occurred in your life, after a tragedy hits. We can use it in so many different aspects of our life. It doesn't have to be death. It could be a sickness, or a family dispute as well. They all comes in shapes and sizes. And I really appreciate each and every one of you for coming. And I have to thank our German friends as well. Danke fürs Zuhören, meine deutsche Freunde, für diese Podcast heute. Thank you. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Lots of love, and I always end with Carol Burnett. Do you remember who Carol Burnett is, Phil?
Yes, I do.
It's unfortunately our generation, isn't it? So I always end with Carol Burnett because she always put a smile on my face every time I listened to her. So I'm so glad we had this time together just to have a laugh or sing a song. Seems we just get started, and before you know it, comes a time we have to say, so long. So long, my dear friends. So long, stay safe, be healthy. And till next week, lots of love to all of you. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.